In order to complete the revision of core vocabularies, we are having the 21st of February, we're having another webinar on focusing on core person and core business, while assembling webinar on DCAT-AP, focusing especially on the high value data set will take place the 24th of February. Having said that, we move to the next slide. You're all aware of the objectives of DCAT-AP, focusing on discovering, focusing on depicting the metadata for catalogs and data sets in order to for them to be easily easily retrievable. We are all aware of the notions of the extensions of break DCAT-AP, geo DCAT-AP, stat DCAT-AP, and as you may all, in relation to W3C, the aim, the difference is to express constraint and usage on DCAT properties and classes, and perhaps create new properties. And also to add the control list. So, what is the status with the alignment with the DCAT 3? And I give the floor here to Bert.
Okay, thank you, Pavlina. I was muting and unmuting myself. So in this webinar, we want to first give in the broad context. We have been in touch with W3C on the working group of DCATs, and they confirmed they have given us an insight in the planning about the releasing of DCAT 3 as a recommendation. So this is information that's just recently received. And so the current plan is that there will be a candidate recommendation end of Q1, so around April. There will be DCAT 3 announced, normally planned as a candidate recommendation. And then there will be planning-wise, normally, and at the end of Q3 too, so just before the summer, an official release of DCAT 3 as a recommendation. And so this roughly fits our activities today, where we as well are trying to look at how to use the new abilities in DCAT 3, in particular the dataset series, and then we can already do this kind of parallel activity on that. What they as well asked from the perspective from this working group is that implementers around the table, that if you have, let's say, usage and inclination of that indication that you use the new features of DCAT 3, in particular dataset series and versioning and other aspects, then this would be good to as well give a notification, for instance, via a GitHub issue on the over there, so that they have some proof that this work is endorsed by the community, and then this process of accepting and becoming a recommendation will be smoothed. So that is the current status. What we did, and now coming back from November to here, so in our previous webinar, we just introduced what was available in DCAT 3. So we looked at DCAT 3 at that time, and we introduced it to here at the community, what is available, and based on that, we provided some alignment possibilities. And one of the conclusions was that if you look just purely technically, that dataset series that dataset series could be technically adopted with a minimal impact. But of course, there's a lot of between technically adoption and then doing it in a harmonized way. There's a lot of difference, of course. And that's what today's webinar is about. We already asked in that webinar to provide suggestions via GitHub. we have what is available, we have took into account for this webinar, but there were not that many. So that's, let's say, an invitation as well, again, to further on after this webinar, if you have some suggestions and some feedback to give us to us. And of course, during the webinar, the previous webinar, there was a request explicitly on this harmonization, so on the dataset series and the usage on it. And so we took this invite from the working group and organized this webinar on this theme. Okay, so for this webinar, if we look, we will present a number of topics and go a little bit deeper into what dataset series can offer to us as community. And we try to make a concrete as possible, a precise as possible proposal, and then we ask you to provide feedback. So that can be in sense of yes, no, or open feedback to it. But we have tried to make it as precise as possible so that you at least can clearly give today as much as possible concrete feedback. That is today. Okay, if we look to dataset series, we will do first a bit of an introduction to give a set of mind, and then go towards a number of feedback moments along the line. So what I will do is now is introduce what are possible usages of introductions of ways that we can look at dataset series, what is available, and then have some possible scenarios and so on that in this usage that we would like or not like to happen. This was if you look zoom in, just very deep.
Question there.
Yes, sorry.
Just 1 minute. Someone asked for a link to the GitHub issue where we would want people's comments.
Okay, so
Katalina gave a link to the general issue page.
Yeah,
what is the number?
Yeah, and actually 240 is probably the overall.
Yeah.
There's and there that's as well labeled with the alignments.
It's in the chat window now. 240. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Continue, please.
Okay, so if we look and zoom in into what DCAT-3 offers us around dataset series, then this is the picture where I put at the bottom the definition in W3C what the dataset series is. A collection of datasets that are published separately but share some characteristics that group them. And then there is some relationship with the collection of datasets that you can find either via the last or the first in the chain, and you can browse to it using next and previous, or from the dataset perspective itself, you can express I'm part of this series. It's with DCAT in series. So this is available, and this is yeah, a very focused view, but we come back later to that. To the individual properties. We're first going to zoom out and take a perspective what we have today in DCAT-2. This is the high level picture. And what happens is that we will add a new notion, dataset series, that is connected with these datasets. And that is the picture that we have to keep in mind now is what is the role of dataset series in the catalog, what we want to align on it. From the introduction of dataset series, that it's good that we a little bit know what are the possible ways that people look at, or how you can consider this as a perspective, why you're going to use them. Is there actually a need for it? So indeed, there's a lot of requests, and in many domains, like for instance, statistical domain or in geospatial domain, they have this notion of dataset series, and there is this need, and it is over there. But still, there's you can look from different perspectives on the catalog and the managers of the catalog or the visitors of the data portals, what we want to do with dataset series. And what we would like to think on your side, and if you're willing to share maybe today or as well in GitHub, what perspective you think dataset series are valuable for in the catalog, in the management of the catalog and the information. And you can look from different perspectives. So from the perspective of the editor, the publisher of data, you can look from the perspective as catalog maintainer. This is a useful concept. You can look from the perspective of the visitor of a data portal. How do I see this on my website? Or maybe there's a notion from the policy side that there's some requirements or things that you could say on that. So if you purely look to from a publisher and then I'm a dataset owner, then you could consider that actually managing, for instance, dataset series are something totally distinct from managing an individual dataset. So in organizations, it might be that somebody is just busy with one individual dataset, and that the dataset series where it is part of is managed by somebody else. So this is a perspective I want to share with you. Another perspective could be that we want to give a message, say, look, the one who sees this and finds this dataset series will know that the data that is connected through this dataset series is actually somehow evolving according to what I call here dimension, according to temporal evolution or spatial evolution or some other evolution. And I, somehow coherently manage this. And each data set, each that is in the collection presents an independent state of affairs. And I want to share that, I want to make that visible. There is another one, if you look from the pure findability from the portal side, then data series could be a mean of an aid in finding the most recent version of the data, that you see that it's not just a collection of data sets available, but that there's some structure and that they are connected with each other, and dataset series are some more stricter and connected, bringing things together, and that gives you a higher level, a more view on it. So this is all different perspectives. This is not only ones, but it's just to give you ways how you can look at dataset series. To make it some more concrete, this is a typical case. You have the notion of budget information of a government, and then every year, as here is depicted, there is a report and a nice table created how the budget is being distributed around the different posts that you spending posts. And every year there's a new version that's coming out. And in order to give users or people that want to have insight in this budget, well, we can aggregate, and in this aggregate, in this collection can be called the budget, and the individual case at a certain point in time has an individual data set, which is shared with distributions and services alone. So this is important already to see that in the level of dataset series, they look and connect to datasets, but there's no expression on distributions or data services connected to it. So this is an example, and then I have now three special cases which I would like to dive into with you. And the first one is what is the community's feeling around?
There are some questions.
Yes,
there are some questions on your previous slides.
Okay.
So there is a question from Matthias.
Okay.
That you talk about the most recent version of the data, and I think that's 2 slides back. Yeah, no, the next one.
This one.
The next one.
Yeah. Okay.
The most recent version of the data, and Matthias says that sort of implies that the dataset and the series are variants of each other.
That the dataset and the series.
Maybe I can say it.
Yeah, it's better.
So the recent version of the data indicates that the data sets in themselves are variants. If they are variants, then they should be considered distributions in the data set. They are complementary data sets that share some characteristics, typically that they together form a larger data set over time, a time series or a geographical division. So I guess maybe I'm nitpicking, but this way of wording it may lead people to use it in the wrong way.
Yeah, so it's the word version that you're talking about.
Yes.
So if we have a statement that is the most recent addition to the set of data sets, then it would actually be more precise. Yeah. Okay, we'll make sure that I don't know if this occurs in other places in documentation, but if it does, then we need to be fairly clear what this means. That it's not versioning; it is new additions.
And it's new edition.
New data sets added.
The recent edition in the collection. The most recent edition in the collection.
Yes, but do we say that the data set that is the last one in this series is necessarily containing all of the data in the previous data sets? I would argue that it's not. It's complementary.
No,
so
it's
together.
I have no prejudice assumption on that in my mind. So I take this example here to make it a thing. For me, there's no indication at this moment that the datasets budget 2022 could contain not all the information from budget 21 and up to 2001. If that is well specified in the description of that dataset, of course. That's if the definition of that dataset says I only contain the data that is related to the year 2022, then I do not expect in that dataset to have information about 2001. But that's up to the definition of that dataset.
There's a question about. There's a question also about whether we're talking about snapshots.
What is the meaning of a snapshot, and what is the goal of the snapshot? Because if you have a running, suppose that you have a collection of data that where you snapshot it at each time, and meaning that you take a picture and you're going to share to that, then you can consider that as an individual data set. And that is then in the same discussion as we had argument before. If you well define this as a good data set description with that content, then this can be part of the series. So it could cover it.
Yeah. So it's a question of the decision of the publisher whether you want to publish snapshots as separate data sets or not.
Yes.
And I think there's another question from Jesper, and I think Jesper, that point of the whether we need a dataset series if only data is added, I think we come back to that later in one of the proposals. That's a good point, but we are coming back to that.
Okay. Okay. The question of Jacob, we come as well to a part to that. Maybe not entirely, but it's good to register that one. So what I want
specifically the temporal and the geospatial.
Geospatial.
Yeah, back.
That's then we come back to that. So what I want to do now is have prepared 3 cases, and I would like to hear your opinion about what is, let's say, the likelihood that this will occur, and the way how you feel that this is, let's say, should be supported as a very good case or more as an exceptional case. So the case is that we have just a description of a dataset series, but no associated datasets with it. So you don't know what is the collection. You have no way to get to the data as such. Our proposal at this moment is not to recommend the introduction of dataset series with no associated datasets if you have no intent to do that. So this that's the first special case. Do you see the need of introducing in your catalog just the notion of a dataset series without the connection to the collection?
So I see there is some discussion about what kinds of dataset series there could be, and there is, I think, an agreement that there could be a list being created on GitHub. I think that would be probably useful to see what kind of dataset series there are. So that's one thing. Then I wanted to have people to comment to the slide that you're looking at.
Yeah,
the proposal to not recommend the using dataset series for a case where you have a series without any members.
Yeah. So I see Hagar, thank you for that. She votes yes. So it would be, if you, this would be good that we have some indication. That this is a kind of a recommendation.
I can see that there's general agreement. There's no objections being voiced, so I think.
Okay, so we can include this as
that gives people another minute to express their agreement. We don't count the number, but I think my usual approach is if people really disagree, then please speak up, and otherwise we'll just move them to the next issue.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think.
I just have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Could the dataset series describe a data registry? So could we use that to describe a registry?
What do you mean with the registry?
What?
Yeah.
So let's say that there's a cancer registry that has several data sets, not time series, but just several data sets. And we want to give information and describe the actual registry, the cancer registry in one country. Could we use this data series to do that? As you said, that then you don't link it to the specific dataset series. But
I think if I'm understanding it well, your use case, you're on. I would see them as individual data sets, and maybe the data sets in a special case, namely that they represent catalogs themselves.
yeah.
And in that sense, they are at the level of the individual entity. They are a catalog, but at the level of the catalog itself that we have, we are now collecting, they are considered just data sets. So the question, this is a bit of the perspective, I think, that things that you would take. So I think that is already covered, but maybe let's talk it offline, take the use case there and to see, and then we can assist you in what is the best advice over there. Is it a good case?
Yeah, because also I think what we need to see is that the dataset series also have this notion of previous and next. So there is some sort of evolution. If it's just separate data sets that share some characteristics, that might not be the right way to do it as a series. But there is certainly cases where you could actually see that as a chain of things that you're doing. So as I said, as Bert says, it's probably good to discuss that separately to see how what a sensible way of working is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then I'm going to the second case, and that's a special case where what the intent actually is to describe a data set, and the only element in the collection is a data set that you always update with the most recent information. So you have indeed the idea that there is a yearly new data available, and you update that only data set, and you have no intent to provide snapshots or states of affairs as different data sets. Then the proposal is not to use dataset series to indicate this kind of evolution, but to keep it just simple as a dataset, where you document well that, okay, this is a dataset that has a yearly update and so on. So there's no need to introduce this additional layer or grouping notion of dataset series for this case. Thank you for the voting. That makes the things easier.
General agreements. Jacob also suggests that that can be done by the accrual policy of the description of the dataset.
Indeed, that's the intent of taking that. Yep. Okay, good. Then we come to a case that as well was partially raised just before the webinar in GitHub. So I think this is a case that as well probably will raise some discussion. So in this case, what I want to raise the question is, do we see a dataset series as a grouping construct? And the only goal is to group a collection of datasets, and that you don't have direct access to the actual data, but that you always have to find the actual data by selecting one of the datasets in the collection. Or do we allow that it has distributions associated with it? And then there's a bit of a risk, and namely that certain properties have impacts on what you mean, like update frequency. If you say the update frequency and that the frequency of the dataset series is yearly, but you have a distribution that you actually update every time when there's new data available, then yeah, this is in conflict with each other. So it becomes hard to understand what it is, the meaning of then this update frequency is about. So that's the reason why to recommend at this moment there's a proposal to consider it only as a grouping construct.
I would like to add the scenario here that I added in GitHub, just as a complicating factor. The scenario is that you have a range of data sets, one per year, over budget, for instance. But you also have an API, and the API contains all of the budgets. Where do you put the API or the data series? No, service, the data service. Where do you provide the distribution pointing to the data service? Do you do that, repeat that on each of the individual data sets, or do you point to it from the dataset series?
Okay, here there's two things. For me, a data service is independent from the dataset. So we could have a data service description that points to the dataset series as saying, okay, I provide data about the whole series. That is, I think, a fine statement. And then that is already tackling that aspect. So another alternative could be that for that case, you create a description of a data set that is the aggregation of all the information, and you connect your servers and distributions on that, and you put that as well into the collection of the dataset series. And there are two ways how you can keep it only as a grouping construct, but I don't know if this is capturing all your cases and you feel sufficiently satisfied with it or not.
Well, we might need to discuss that further, because I think also what you said, Matthias, the alternative is to put the link to the data service on each of the data sets. It's probably you want to do that any case. If you get to a data set, there is no easy way to come back if that link was only on the dataset series, to come back to the dataset series and find that link to the data service. So you probably will still want to do that. But I think it's a sort of a more fundamental discussion about that. I think for the time being, I've seen many people agree with the proposal to not recommend doing distribution, and especially distribution with files associated to it, I think. But maybe we can further discuss this issue of that, which is actually basically already being discussed on GitHub, and continue that discussion there to see how that scenarios could work out. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. No other summary further, Max? Okay. That's we need to take now. Okay.
So.
Okay. So this is essentially the grouping aspect on the high level, on the usage cases that we have prepared. So there might be other use cases that you might consider. Then don't hesitate to share them.
I see one here.
Yes.
But it's a use case which is, I think, is a little bit tangential to it. If the service has data sets that are not in the series, but so that's looking from the perspective of the data that service. And if the service is not related to the dataset series, I don't think there needs to be a link from the dataset series to the service, but maybe the other way around.
There's no completeness. There's no requirement, and the relationship never states you are only serving that information. So there's no completeness on that in many of the relationships of the semantics.
I agree that we need to discuss this further. I just want to point out that from a portal owner's perspective, it's going to be quite complicated to provide an overview of what you find, pointing out that there is both downloadable files for something that is, a dataset series, as well as an API when you find the individual datasets or you want to hide them. There is some complexity here, and I think we need to think of it from the portal perspective, what you really want to show.
Okay, that's the reason why I pointed out this portal perspective as well, that there might be needs that the catalog has to provide so that the portal can do its job better.
And I think we're coming back to that discussion a little later, I think.
Yeah, there are other places where we have similar, let's say, connections or so on. Okay, no other comments that we should take now?
No, I don't think so.
So what we are going to do now is that we're going to deep dive into different topics on the data set series itself, and to try to give a number of properties, semantics, and usage nodes. So that is the objective for the remaining of the webinar. What we have done is that we try to make the proposals in a way that it makes a lot of sense. And so that means that if you read a property of a dataset series and those values, then they apply to the dataset series entity resource. And so it's not about something that happens in the dataset itself. No, it's a property that should describe the whole collection as a whole, and the name is that dataset series. It may that there's some relationship, of course, with the different values that are present in the data sets indicated by the data sets in the collection, and that the value that you can see for the same property or the similar property in the dataset series is a summarization. So that this is a kind of coherency that we want to organize into it, and vice versa. Of course, we want that there's no semantic of conflicts. So if we read the value of a property at the level of the dataset series, the goal is that this is reasonable and valid and not in conflict with what the values are provided by the datasets in the collection. So that are the principles behind that we took into account to make our proposals. What is our proposal? First of all,
can you go back? Bert,
okay.
Can you go back maybe and give an example? I was thinking of the example where you have the example that you gave earlier with the budget files for 2001 to 2023. Then the dataset series could say that the temporal coverage is 2001 to 2023, whereas the individual datasets would just have a 1 year coverage. And the other thing is that if you have a series with these 2001 to 2023, then the dataset series shouldn't say it only contains 2001 to 2010. That would be in conflict with the values that you will find in the series. So there's sort of a coherence that you need to have, that those need to be in line. But in the case of the dataset series, it could be a range, whereas in the dataset series, there's points in there. So I think that was maybe for the example. And the question that Mihai asked is whether the series has to be ordered, whether there's an obligation for the series to be ordered.
That is a topic that we have around navigation. So we have one of the topics is about this, and that could be a question, a decision.
Another question from Joachim is it assumed that any property of the dataset series applicable for the contained datasets? That's not always the case, and I think we'll come back to that later also. And especially, for example, the publisher could be different between dataset series and the datasets, individual datasets.
Indeed, yeah. Okay, thank you, Max, for following it. Okay, then, so what is the proposal on the level of the class definition? We just took over as a new entity the definition from W3C. There's, to my proposal and so on, no need to change it. If the community would say we would like rather to let's say add extra things here on the definition or to make it more precise, then let's discuss that through GitHub. But at this moment, the premise is that we take over the one from W3C. And this is the summary. So you will see this large table. So we will discuss topic by topic a few of these rows. What you will find, the definitions here are the ones we have currently in DCAT-AP, and they are not necessarily the equivalent of the same text as in DCAT. That could be, that's maybe another topic of, let's say, an alignment and an improvement with DCAT that we can do, but it's not what I've done here. I've took here the definitions as they are currently in DCAT-AP, so that this is coherent at this moment, and add here and there the usage notes that occur into the resolvement of the proposal. The blue table here is for the dataset series, and the green table, that is the one that you will see when it concerns to a dataset in the context as being part of the collection of the dataset series. So these rules apply to datasets that are part of a dataset series. So that's what you will see. So when you see the green table, you have to think dataset. When you see the blue table, you think dataset series as entity. Okay, these tables are not readable, of course, because, and therefore to make it the topic and what is on the table more readable, we have identified 9 topics, which already gives us a rather brief overview of the usage of dataset series, but maybe that's not complete. You want to add something more after this webinar, and let's put that as well into GitHub.
You're going a little fast, Bert.
What?
There are some questions on the slide where you have the principles.
Okay, good. Sorry.
Look at there's a question that he said the second point on your principles is problematic. So maybe Ludger can say what his problem is.
Okay, good.
Yes. I think there's a conflict between the first and the second bullet point, or there could be one if I understood it wrong, because the first one says properties of the series, talk about the series, and the second one says it's a summary. So one could think if the crucial periodicity is always the same, I only put it on the series and not on the single data sets. And this is where the discussion about overriding came from. But I think it's in conflict with the first point. So we should not assume that it's a summary of shared characteristics, in the sense that if they are not on the, if they are on the series but not on the data set, then we can assume that the data set also has it, because then we mix the 2 levels. So
no, that's not. I think that's not the intention. And maybe it's formulated. I think what I said is the example that when you have these budget files from 2001 to 2023, then the series may say that the series is for data sets that cover 2001 to 2023. There are of course, there are other ones that are not that don't apply. For example, if you have an update frequency that is completely different from series than for the data set. So we need to be careful what we say. So there might be a summary of some of the things in the data set so that you have an idea of what the series is about. But I don't think there is a formal way to do overriding. So if there are any conflicts, there is no way that you can override things. But certainly we need to be careful in the description of both the dataset series and the datasets that there are no things that could provide conflict, I think. Yeah, but I understand your point.
I agree.
This is not a formal statement. This is a way how we looked at it and how we try to create coherency in the reading and to make the semantics as clear as possible. And
Matthias points to the way that DCAT-3 says it, and I think that's actually captures the intention better than this second bullet point.
A note on that is that the union means basically that you are applying the triple from the series level on the dataset level, and that the semantics then is somehow to combine the 2 statements, which would, I assume, be property specific, what the intention, what the semantics would be.
Yeah, so for the temporal one, for example, that would be quite an easy one to, but there might be others that you really don't want to do that, because then you're creating conflict if you do that.
Yeah, so it's have to be careful in you have to see when it's applicable and when it's not applicable. So it's not always, in any case, always on this property. It has to be like this. There's some subtlety. Let's discuss that when we discuss on the topic on dimensions. Then you will see that there's a little bit of on this balancing point on it.
Lara has a question whether there needs to be the same schema for both the dataset series and the dataset, and I don't think there is any reason to require that.
No, not at this moment. That's an open topic. It's not one of the topics that we have put into the agenda. We could have some arguments, or let's say discussion on how this is evolved, but in principle, again, this is free. Of course, they are strongly related. The thing is, you don't put typically the intent of a dataset series. I think that is maybe didn't mention that in the beginning. In DCAT, we already have sufficient properties available to interrelate datasets. So part of, related to, etc., etc. It is the goal of a dataset series, I think, to be more strict and to give some more coherency in this free form interrelationships. So there's always this free form of interrelationships that you can use. It's available to it, but dataset series want to do something more stricter reading on it.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so before the break, let's see if the timing, yeah, it will be roughly.
We are still on time.
We will do the first three, and then we have a short break and we'll do the rest afterwards. Okay, on the descriptive information, if we look to it, there's a need to describe what is the dataset series, and our proposal is to make title and description like it is for datasets mandatory. So this is the proposal. If you tabular form, as it was given, it's more readable. This is then how it looks like. So what is your opinion on this, to have at least a title and a description?
People coming in with +1s.
Okay.
There's also someone, Jesper says that the title should be mandatory and the description recommended.
Yep, otherwise you end with something like an empty string, or a dot or something. That's what I see from our data publishers. They don't want to give a description, they just enter an empty string. So it does not make sense to require it if there's nothing in it.
But you actually would endorse cheating. Or you say people are cheating and therefore we delete it. I think the idea from DCAT-AP proper was that if you don't provide a description, it makes it very hard for users to understand what is going on. So therefore it's being mandatory. And if people then put a dot there, they're actually violating the rule. I think that from a quality perspective, it wouldn't. The problem is you make it recommended, then you'd say to people, oh, it's okay not to have a description. And then a lot of people would maybe not do it and would not try to do it. So I think that was the discussion that we had with DCAT-AP initially, and therefore it became mandatory. Otherwise, the only thing that's mandatory is the title, and that doesn't tell you very much, especially if you look at data sets that are now being published. Sometimes they have just the same title for everything. So that was the discussion. I don't know if other people are in agreement with this.
The reason why I think here on the description is the motivation is on what Max said. That's the business, the real quality motivation. The other is a technical alignment. It is already in DCAT-AP today. You should provide for a dataset a title and a description. So, and I didn't touch on it yet, but according to DCAT, a dataset series is a subclass of a dataset. And if we want to apply to it, you already enforced on it. We cannot make a specialization that it says you should not use descriptions. Then we have to lift it for datasets. Then we make a different topic, and then we have to lift it for dataset first. Now, that's my proposal. So if there's a motivation from the community to not provide descriptions.
But I see quite a lot of agreement to have both of them. And there's some people who say that description might be recommended. So I think that currently, if I'm reading this right, there's a sort of majority for keeping the two here mandatory. So,
okay, well, let's keep it as a moment. And if you, I think if you think that it should not be mandatory, let's make an issue out of it, but then we take it up in the context both of data sets as well. I think that's the fairest to consider.
Yeah, it applies to data sets themselves as well. So, okay, let's just record that there are some people who have second thoughts about this, and then we move that to GitHub, and then we'll move to the next one.
Okay, good. Then, okay, the next one is to go about identification, the topic. So since we mentioned already that dataset series are independent from the datasets that they collect, they should be having a good identity. So it is not something that you should think as that this is an anonymous node drifting around. So it should be maintained as it is like a data set with a quality identification. And therefore, we would recommend to use persistent URIs to identify this. Maybe this is kind of obvious, but I wanted to raise this one as well as a usage note. And of course, something that is connected to it. So dataset series have therefore their own life cycle independent of the datasets that they are collecting to it.
Getting +1s. This one. I think it's a reasonably uncontroversial proposal. And I see ones and ones and more ones.
Okay, good.
Don't see any
Then
objections. Okay, let's move then to the next one.
Life cycle. So if you think over the dataset series and you we are going to introduce it, so you have already today's catalog, and then we say, okay, now we have this ability of dataset series. What happens is that we are going to create this notion, and then we can associate with that a release date, and namely at the moment that we consider that this dataset series was initialized and managed. So that this is the moment what we see on that. When it moves to management and new data sets come into the collection and so on, then you are in changing in the live mode as dataset series, and then this notion of a modification date comes into the game, and there I wanted to make it more precise. The proposal is as follows: that we indicate with the modification dates of a dataset series the moment that the collection of the dataset series is changed. So when you add a new dataset or when you remove a dataset out of it, so when the collection actually is being changing. So it's not when the datasets or one of the datasets in the collection itself is changed, but when the collection is changing. So then the modification date of the dataset series is changed. And then if we look to the end of life, there are two scenarios what it could mean end of life in this. Either all of the data sets in the collection are not maintained anymore, then the question is what we do with the series. We not maintain it either, so it is stored, it's archived or some way. Or, and this is a different case, then the grouping itself is not maintained anymore. So there's, for whatever reason, we had these budgets that we have at yearly, and at certain moment in time, the responsible party says, well, actually, I'm not going to do a coherency of these budgets. I just leave it, and I don't going to make a coherent story out of it anymore. So I leave the grouping. I don't do anything about that anymore. So there are, I think, two end-of-life scenarios that occur to that. We don't have something special to indicate of that at the moment, maybe ADMS status or some that, but that are two different cases I want to raise to covering the life cycles. So
And there's a
this is
question
the
from Mihai
proposal.
on that.
Yeah.
Specifically,
Yeah.
what is the relationship between the status of the series and the status of the data sets? Because you're
Yeah.
sort of implying with your proposal that the scenario 1 in the end of life is that there is a relationship between the two.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the case and how to express that.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so there's indeed, so we don't, I think archiving, and that's maybe a general stuff topic that we could have, how we indicate archiving. At this moment, we have only ADMS status on it. So to indicate the status.
Yeah, so there is also the question about Jakob not willing to maintain the modification of a series as the freshest modification date of all the data sets in the series. And I don't think that's the idea. I think that the modification date of the series is the date that the series was changed and not that the data set were changed. So the change in the series would be addition of a data set, for example, in the most normal case, I think.
Yeah. So to give you an example, suppose in our case of the budgets, and for whatever reason in the budget file of 2001, the spelling of the author that has made the file, and that's part of the document and so on, was changed, say it corrected, then you could say that the update of the modification time of the budget 2001 was changed to today, but the series itself has not modified. So there's nothing unchanged on the thing. So it still is an older date and it has nothing to relate with that.
And Jakob has a objection or a comment about the first bullet point under alive, especially the second part of that sentence. If data in one of the data sets is changed, that you're proposing that then also the modification date of the series is changed. Is that correct?
Well, actually, I was objecting to that. So it seems to me that the bullet point says that when the data in one of the data sets changes, then of course the modification date of the data set changes, and therefore the modification date of the whole series should change, and I would not like to do that.
And we agree on that the case that we try to.
That is a large maintenance effort to actually do that, even if from the serious point of view, the set of data sets stays the same. I think that is maybe also something that we need to take into account, that might be too expensive to do that. Yeah. But certainly what we want to do is if you add a data set to the dataset series, you want to reflect that in the modification date of the data of the series, but not in all the changes in the datasets. Matthias?
Yeah, I would say that we don't even need to do that. We could set the accrual periodicity to be maybe monthly or yearly or whatever, and just refer in new datasets to the series via the in-series property, and they should be fine. Just the creation date of the series and how often it is updated. It should be an alternative to the modification date.
Yeah. Matthias, is always the case. It's not mandatory, so you don't have to do it. But I think if it's important for people to know when that was changed, because an accrual periodicity is an intention, is a planning, and you might not know, and you might have to, with the creation date and the accrual periodicity, you might need to calculate what today is the last date that it was updated. And if you want to provide that information, you can. If you don't want to provide information, you don't have to. So, but I think the idea would be that ideally you provide the date of last modification when a data set is added, but it's not an obligation.
Perfect. This is exactly the recommendation we have written in the Swedish version. So yes.
Okay, there was a comment from Casper. No, it's shouldn't be. Don't know why. Should it be? It's mandatory, but I was overlooking.
Well, but users like this information. I think as a publisher of the dataset series, you probably want to provide that information to your users, unless it's too expensive or you have other reasons why not to do it. But I think I would think that user would be useful for users to know that.
Yeah, it just was to feel the water. How many people would be more strict and to try to be provide this value, the modification date.
Okay, so
not
maybe we then give people a couple of minutes to stretch your legs.
Just one comment. I think we should. I think most of the time it will be not a problem anyways, because if I add something to a series, I will, for example, a new budget, I will increase the temporal span this series is covering. So I have to update the modified of that the series anyways. And then there's also the DCAT last, where I can point to the last element in the series, and if I change this, I also have to change the modified date of the series. So in most cases, I will modify the modified date anyways, and I think we should not mix the subject of the property. To say we change the modified if something else than the series changes. If everything in the RDF of the series stays the same, and I just have another element in the series, I think the modified should not change. Yeah, so, but we have lots of properties to talk about, like ADMS status, availability, and the crucial periodicity.
Do I understand you right that adding a new element in the collection of the series for you doesn't mean you have to change the modification time? That is not a change of the dataset series?
If I have no statement in the dataset series that changes, I would say no.
Because that's the difference for me between the metadata has changed, because the let's say that's for my rewording. For me, the content of the dataset series, I see it as the state of the collection that is it refers to and that it indicates. And if that collection is changing, then I would like to see, then I expect that it is modified. And so when there's adding to something to this collection or removing from the collection, that I see as major changes in to the dataset series. Whereas,
yeah, I understand. Yeah, I see this, but well, if the RDF of the series does not change, it does not change. So I don't have to say it has changed. And in addition, we are in the linked data. So we don't use has part or whatever the name of the property is, linking from the dataset series to the dataset. So people all over the world can say, I have a dataset that is in this dataset series. and I, as the publisher of the dataset series, don't have to know about it. So I cannot even assume that I know when the last change was made. So we could say we could recommend using the last and say it should always point to the last entry in the series, even if it's not a time-based series or something like that. And then we have implicitly the modified data. And
okay, now you point to something that I not have considered in the discussion, and it's maybe a topic that we can think over during the break as well, is do we allow and do we consider that other organizations can add without notification, without any communication to the maintainer of the dataset series, an element into the collection? That is the case.
That doesn't make sense.
That Ludwig has indicated.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. But yeah, it's a case that in an open world you can actually do that. But as you are claiming that an organization is the publisher of the dataset series, then having someone else just putting something in your collection is, well, it's not done. I think that's
from a governance point of view. I find this way weird. So technically, I agree on it, and it's the thing. But I wouldn't consider this as a normal and a case that we should base our semantics upon. Personally, but
let's think about that. I think
agree.
It would be good, I think, maybe to have a 5-minute break now, so people can.
It was a good case, I think we should make that explicit as well. So that's
make a GitHub issue for that. Maybe also to discuss it further.
Okay, thank you very much.
We'll be back in 5 minutes.
Okay,
15:17.
Okay, I think we had our short break. Max, you're there?
I'm back.
Okay, good. Okay, so we have the next topic on our agenda are agent roles. And the goal is to see what are the agent roles we would like to include. And looking at data sets, we have identified 2 recommended properties, and the proposal is to take them over, to use them as well for dataset series, publisher and contact point, with a slight modification in the, let's say, the objective of the publisher, not maybe only to make it available, but as well to ensure the coherency of the dataset series, in the sense that if you are publishing, if you're creating the dataset series, you have an intent of some coherency around it, and that you take this role up as publisher, and not just purely just as a grouper. With the note, of course, and it's already mentioned maybe earlier onwards, that the publisher of a dataset series doesn't have to be the publisher of every and all datasets in the collection. And a good example is actually if you have the budgets case, then at a certain point in time it becomes an older dataset, and they are moved towards a digital archive. So then you still can maintain the series, but then it becomes maybe offered and published by different agencies. So this is the proposal of the case.
Comments there? No comments? Yeah, people want to express agreement.
Yeah, they're warming up.
I don't see any. Yes, they're
Thank you,
very
Jesper, to take the lead. Okay, so far, people feel confident that this is a good case. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Move to the next one.
Another topic is legal information. On this, we followed a similar approach as well with datasets, and the motivation is that here, since we are talking about in the collection of data sets, and the rules about the data sets and the legal usages are even expressed at the most fine-grained, namely the data distributions or the data services. Our proposal is actually not to include any legal information at this level, but rely on the fact that this all should be available at the level, the most fine-grained and most concrete level of our data description, namely distribution and services, so that we don't come into conflicting messages. What is the...
I have a point here from Jeroen and Pim. Separate topic, and I'm not quite sure which topic do you mean, the legal information topic?
What I meant is we often like to use the terms of use, which could include legal information. Is the property terms of use part of another chapter, or is it included in legal information?
Well,
because
would be
terms
legal.
of use, I would like to know, because then you know whether you can use it for commercial use, those kind of properties.
Yes, but the proposal is that the dataset series as such is not usable. What you're using is the data from the datasets that are part of the series. So that, I think that is the idea, that not to put it here, because then you would actually try to say something about the data in the datasets, and that would not be the right place here. You understand, see what I mean?
Of course, and so it's not prohibited that you put in the documentation, the landing page, some indication towards it. That's what is the coherent, normally objective of it. That's of course you can do that, but the precise licensing, legal in terms of use and so on, we let's say from the specification side on, we believe that this is at the most precise level should be there.
Matthias?
So it becomes more and more clear to me that there is a perception here that the dataset series is not the sum of its data in the datasets that it contains. You are considering the dataset series basically as a new dataset that is just the references to the datasets it contains. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that also something that we can read from the specification of the DCAT-3 specification, or is this an interpretation on the level of the DCAT-AP?
I think
well, that's good question.
in the DCAT specification, you will not find it so explicitly. It's probably open, left it open. You might feel some sentences inclined to it, some sentences not. And that's the reason actually for this use case, uses 3 of adding distributions or no distributions. It's one of these elements into it, and it's in more, therefore more a DCAT-AP notion.
I would like to postpone this kind of question for people to get a chance to read the documentation from this perspective, because this is totally new for me, and I hadn't read it that way before. And I think it has implications on how you consider what a dataset series is, and also how, for instance, the semantics of how properties applies to the dataset series and how they are also transferred to the dataset. I'm just saying this requires some thinking.
Okay, good. That's a good point. Let's make it clear and this note that is on it. Yeah. Of course, nothing is yet carved in stone. So what we are now doing and exchanging in the working group is getting some basis of a to build a proposal for the community. Yeah. So that's something that can be read and that you feel then comfortable with or not. So this.
Is there already a GitHub issue to discuss this further, or shall we create that?
We shall create that topic.
Yes, please.
Okay.
The question from Geraldine about the contact points. The contact point is not mandatory for datasets. So it's not a change that we're making here, making it not making it mandatory for dataset services. It's not mandatory for datasets either.
No. No, that's indeed at the level of DCAT-AP. It is recommended but not mandatory.
I see that Simon is interested to participate in that thinking about what the relationship between the series and the datasets are. So I think that's good to. I think
Okay.
there's quite a lot of interest to discuss that that topic.
Okay, good. Let's make an issue out of it. But consider on this. So I hope that this is a clear statement and this is in line with the data sets and yeah, in general. It's okay, fine. Okay.
I don't see any the legal information. I'm not quite sure that we have an agreement there. There's still some questions about that, but there's also a comment that in DCAT legal information should be on distributions. So that would mean that it should not be on the dataset series.
Yeah, I see, Max. I see from the Jesper already started with +1 no legal info, and after that there is some support for it. So it's there's some support, but I consider from Matthias' perspective that maybe there's some additional thinking needed in the let's say in the light sense weight that we have filled it in.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. on the dimensions. So this is where we come to the notion of sharing some characteristics. So this is part of the definition of the dataset series. So share some characteristics. And that is what I call here the dimension. So the characteristic along you want to see the evolution. So the thing that they are, no, I have to say it the inverse. You have a shared characteristics, but the collection of the dataset series evolves over some axis. And that axis where it still evolves and where you want to group it along, that is typically something like geospatial or temporal. So we have seen it in our example with the budget in the year, but it can be as well typically spatial, that you do a growing coverage of the areas that you have the same information being as well expressed in different spatial areas. So the dimensions are the things along it evolves, along the data evolves, and you want to make that somehow explicit and notify this to the reader of the dataset series. So this is the notion of dimension I added here.
Jesper has a question whether topic is also a dimension. And maybe you can explain that, Jesper?
Yeah, so
Yeah, can I give an example? For example, we have the water quality, or we have a couple of data sets on the water quality, and you need to understand, I think I have 5 different data sets. You have the locations where the samples are taken, you have a table with all the measurements in the laboratory, and we have some other characteristics. You need all data sets to understand that topic, water quality. And I would like to group these data sets. And my idea was to use these data set series to group them.
Yeah, and then now you group them on that topic. That's the sharing of the characteristic, and then you do a republication, or you make a new version of it. Now I'm taking the snapshot thing and so on. What happens? When you change this set of data? Do you add a new topic to it?
No, the dataset series would never be changed. I change the datasets change, of course. Some use this like snapshots, where we have, for example, the locations we take samples. We keep the older records, and the table of measurements from the laboratories is just one dataset with a distribution that is lines added to it. But I would like to create one dataset series that does not change, to group these data sets, to have them somehow combined. Right now, I'm giving this as a text information in the description, but that's difficult to understand because it's written in German, and it's not at all machine readable that these data sets belong together.
Okay.
I think that's also a good point. The kinds of dimensions. I think that's also part of the early discussions where we had, where we can see what kinds of dataset series there are. And there are ones, I understand, that are evolving, which is basically mostly for the temporal ones. And there are things that are grouping in some other characteristic, which could be the topic, like water quality, or also geospatial, like the country. So I think that maybe something that we need to take in that discussion about what kinds of dataset series there are. Yeah.
Okay.
So different use cases.
I think this is a use case where the use case is grouping around a particular topic, where the intent is that the collection is not changing over time. That is the summary, the technical summary. Is it correct? Jesper?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, let's add that as a topic to it.
Yeah.
In this case, this is not what, so it has no evolution. And so what I want to talk about here in topic 6 about dimensions is about the evolution along something, and that's along what? Along this dimension. That is the topic of 6 here. So I will put that as a new use case as well into it, but then it's not covered on this discussion. Okay. I think we passed this slide. So what is the example? Of course, in the budget. So we have the shared characteristic. That is what is in green. The budget is the shared element, and the dimension is the year that you see, and it comes at and thus evolving the series and adding new property, new data sets into the collection. That is the typical example. Now, if we look to what we do with when we have such a dimension, and we particularly look to temporal coverage and spatial coverage, because for those two, we have properties in the specification of DCAT and DCAT-AP. So we have temporal coverage and spatial coverage, and we're only taking those two as properties, and we look to what we want to have as a value in those properties for the data sets in the collection. So budget 2001, budget 2004. What do we want to have then for the temporal coverage? Since it evolves the dataset series as an intention over time in the temporal dimension, then the advice, the proposal is that at that point in time, that dataset should have explicitly mentioned its temporal coverage. So for the dataset budget 2023 on the right-hand side, we expect that the property temporal coverage has the value 2023. Optionally, and this is typically what you see already today happening, is that in order to increase the findability in this series, editors and publishers already add in the title budget 2023. So we make this just as an optional option that you can provide such descriptive information inside of the data. It's not mandatory. What we want to encourage more is that the machine readable property, temporal coverage or spatial coverage, in case that is a dimension of the dataset series, you should fill it in and it should be there. That is the effects on and then you see this green table because it's then on the data sets inside the collection. Are there any comments on this?
That basically means that you have limited the amount of different ways you can use a series to only temporal and spatial.
No, that says for those cases that we have, that you have a dataset series that is evolving around spatial or temporal, we do something extra.
Okay, thank you. But I just want to mention that the spatial is not one dimension, it's probably 2 or 3. So it's not in a line somehow, which for me would indicate that we don't have last and first and things like that. I just want to mention that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's a question from Mantas. Why do we need to duplicate that if you can calculate it from the dataset to the series?
Oh, at the level of the dataset series, I have not, that's the next slide. So this is only about the level of the dataset in the collection. So if you have a dataset series defined, like budgets, and it evolves over time, and it says yearly update, then the expectation is that every data set in that collection will indicate for which year it is providing data for.
Again, in answer to Mantas, if you don't do it in the data sets, then there is no way to calculate it. That's basically the answer to his question on this particular part of how to describe it within the data set metadata. Okay, I see +1s coming in.
Okay, so this is just coherency and expectation. So this normally, I think.
Yeah, I get +1, so I think this proposal is
okay. Good.
Okay, so now you have
now
proposal number
I shift my perspective to the collection itself, to the dataset series, to that part. And if we say, like for the budget, the dimension is temporal, so we see the evolution according to the temporal, then the expectation that we can have is that the value of this temporal coverage covers the union of all temporal coverages that are included in the collection. So if I have in my dataset series in the collection datasets from 2001 until 2023, then at least I expect a range as description for the temporal coverage starting from maybe 2000 until 2024, something that would be valid. And of course, since typically there's every bound to this accrual periodicity that you have a yearly update or bi-yearly or something like this, it could be wise not to close the temporal coverage, but maybe have an open-ended definition for that. So this is the proposal at the level of the dataset series. So this is somehow you have calculated, you have described what this dimension is, and you try to summarize it and to aggregate it in a range or in some few values that cover the dimension that where each data set in the collection is as a part of, may provide a part of.
Okay. Matthias is against this.
0, 1, thinking
No,
of
he's changed it back to +1. So. Okay. Any other? I also see one suggestion from Jesper to have express the dimension in a machine readable way by having a URI from a controlled vocabulary list. And I think that's something that we also could put as a specific point. I know that people from the publications office are also on the call, so maybe we take that into account. But I think first of all, we need them to agree on a list of dataset series types, and that we can actually ask for a controlled vocabulary for that. Okay.
There's a question on temporal dataset series of spatial datasets from Jeroen and Pim. Can you give an example?
Same spatial dataset measured in many years, different years, like your budget sheet. Then you have 2 dimensions in your data series in principle. And so is it then a temporal or a spatial data series?
It can be both. It's not, they only have, what I mentioned is we have in DCAT 2 properties, 2 specific properties for temporal coverage and for spatial coverage. And if it evolves, the data sets in the series evolve along spatial and along temporal, then it would apply to both. If you have it only evolve around spatial, then you only apply the one for spatial. If you're around temporal, you apply it only on temporal. And if it's none of the 2 relevant for you, then you don't have to do anything. This is not used.
So it's basically up to the publisher to decide what the view is that you want your users to have.
Yeah. So this is a guidance on that your users get indeed a good word. The users, the readers that dive into your dataset series collection, that they find some coherency in that.
Matthias has a question about the last sentence about allowing open-ended approach.
The open-ended approach, what I mean with is that in particular for temporal, for location, it is maybe more difficult. It's in the sense of then you could always add the globe or something like this. But in the temporal, it is, you say from 2001, and you don't specify the end moment in the series.
Is that okay, Matthias?
Yes, actually, I just commented because why I had a -1 first, because I misunderstood, and I thought just like copyright notice is something that you always have to go in and change in the bottom of the web page or something. It just feels annoying. So perfect. Move on.
Okay, good. Okay, any other points here? I see +1s coming in.
Okay, thank you very much.
So no objections.
On the next topic, and this is related already to this suggestion to what to handle with the other dimension. There's at this moment no other, let's say, machine readable representation on how to make an agreement upon how to make that visible. So it could be indeed a good suggestion that we, but then it will be really extension and DCAT-AP extension. It's not present in DCAT to indicate along which dimension, along which evolution dimension the dataset series is evolving. So at this moment, postpone, but maybe we can try to make a version or something on it.
Because there's a question or a comment from Lutger that only finished temporal dataset series have an end date, but that's not what we were saying, I think. We said that you may want to do an open-ended, but you may also want to do a change in the metadata every time that you add in the dataset. So there's no, you cannot imply that only the finished ones have end dates, or that if you see an end date and it's finished. You can't do that. There's a status field to actually tell you whether or not it's closed or still open.
Yeah, there's no, it's indeed no strong argument. It's just an indication that you can consider open-ended and that you don't have to each time to update the metadata, which is indeed very annoying for a publisher.
And Jesper suggests that also geographic resolutions could be a dimension in the data series, and I think that should be part of the discussion that we're going to have about types of dataset series. Yeah, is that okay, Lutger? Jesper? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we'll move, if people do not object, I think, to moving the discussion on these other dimensions to GitHub, then we can continue with number 7.
Okay, so then topic 7 is about evolution. So we had the dimension, that is the indication how long we evolve, and then the evolution. Here we want to point out that the frequency of updates of the datasets is different than the frequency of the updates in the of the dataset series itself. So that is the element. So what is our assumption is that the datasets, once they are in the dataset series, then we do not expect that they update in the same pace as the series is being added with a new element. To show the case, this is the typical example. So if you have a data set budget 22, and with the frequency yearly, if you say that, then you expect that every year the budget 22, that data set is being updated. So you expect in 2025 an update to this data set. And that, of course, conflicts with the title and the expectation that you say budget's 22. So you have to be aligned. Normally, we should be aware of that as metadata experts onto it. But that means that if we want to express in our dataset series, in my budgets of my government, then you can say it is a yearly update for the dataset series. And so there's a new dataset added every year. But the budget 22, that is part of the collection, can be then set to a frequency, for instance, irregular or for editorial purposes only, and so on, to indicate that there might be still some updates upcoming. That is the example to give. So what we want to clarify a bit here is that the proposal is that the frequency of the dataset series is the pace at which new elements are added or removed, and then it's removed here, to the dataset series. Whereas the frequency of the dataset is the frequency or the pace at which the dataset itself is updated. Okay. That is the proposal. If it's clear enough.
There's another example that Jacob gives about a geo-based series where you have streets in a town, part of a series where you have the streets in many towns. And the series is not updated as frequently, but the streets in the individual data sets may change more often. And that's indeed the idea here. Okay, I get +1s.
Yeah, so this is the goal.
Luger makes the point that properties of the data series should always talk about the series only and not about the data sets.
That's exactly one of the
principles. +1.
Okay, good.
So I think this is number 7 is okay.
Okay,
then I think
good. Then we move to topic 8, and this is about the whole, how we indicate the collection of being a member of a data set in a dataset series. And what is the navigation or the way how you come to them, and you can find all the data sets that are in the collection. So this navigation patterns, what is the preferred option and what do the community would like on that. As already mentioned early on, is that dataset series can point to a dataset by indicating you are the last in the collection or you're the first in the collection, but it is the dataset itself that declares with the property in series I'm part of the series. So this is the other way around. So the question is, what should we recommend to use in these many possible cases? And what is the expectations? And like one of the earlier questions in the webinar was, should be ordered. It is an expectation that we expect that the collection is ordered. To give you an overview, what happens if we have for each property, what is the effect and what is the case when we add a new data set to the collection. Then in case of previous DCAT-pref, then if you add a new data set to the collection, you actually have no adaptation to any of the existing data sets. You point from the new data set to the previous one and you're done. So you can use that independent. You don't change other metadata. If you do next, then you actually have to change existing data sets in the collection to point to the new one that you want to add to it. So there's an adaptation of an existing record. If you use DCAT first, so that points from the dataset series to dataset. So if you update there and you add a new data set and it's more recent, and it wants to be the first, then you have to adapt it. So you have to adapt the dataset series to point to the right first. With the last, usually you mean the oldest, so the first entry that you have added to the series. The expectation is that you don't have to do an updatation to the dataset series. So if last, it stays the first value that you probably have registered. And then if you look to in series, that's from dataset to dataset series. There's nobody impacted. When you added a new dataset, you point to the dataset series where you belong to, and that's hooked up together. So
one question from my side, Bert.
Yeah.
Your interpretation of first and last is completely opposite to what I would think. I think the first one is the oldest, and the last one is the newest.
Oh.
And you said the other way around.
Okay. That's maybe then yeah, I had the first, yeah. Okay. That's a good point. That's maybe something that
Geraldine was in agreement with me.
Yeah. Okay.
And there is the other point from Oystein that you don't need both prev and next. You only if you have the prev.
That's question. That's
to be able to create the sequence.
Okay, so the topic is of question, and we want to have feedback on: do we want to minimize the usage of those properties? Is there a need? Do we want to do the effort on it, or we just leave it open to the community to use what best suits their goals?
So there's 2 points that are being made. First of all, is that calculating the value of properties in DCAT in series might be expensive. The second point is that not all dataset series will have a notion of ordering.
Yeah, but
I think that the two comments that were made.
Yeah.
Which may favor the use of DCAT in series over the other ones. Or maybe saying that there are cases where you want to do both.
I think we should compare it with SCOS. There is an in-scheme property pointing from every concept to the concept scheme, and that is hugely useful. And we should not, we should do the same. We should require that the in-scheme, in-series property to be there for something to be considered part of a series. The next and prev could be used either between datasets inside of one series or without the series altogether. I don't see a necessity to connect the two. Could be done, but not necessarily.
Okay, we see an quote from Matthias. So what instead of the goal, and this is then to use only, so to recommend, and even stronger, to use in series to indicate the membership in of a dataset in a collection of a dataset series, and to use that one. And this
just
is
a comment to Ludger, who is talking about a pointer from a dataset series to a dataset. And there is currently no way, I think, in DCAT to make that link from the dataset series to the dataset.
Last and first is actually that's the case. That's the only way. That's a specialized way, but not in general. Series member, yes.
That series member, it doesn't exist, not to my knowledge.
Well, they have in section 7, I put the link, it's in the DCAT 3 specification. So I don't know why someone not opened this.
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
probably it is
So-
there. Probably there's the inverse property.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
So
Okay, yeah, I see the DCAT series member.
So they have a pretty good guidance on this.
Okay, so the question is, do we prefer, we could say, okay, look, first, do we agree? I would make the proposal first. Do we agree that we should not use or prefer the breadth and navigation properties as the only way, the specific properties as the only way to indicate membership of a data set in a dataset series, and we only rely on DCAT in series / DCAT series member, one of the two, and we only rely on those.
Can I
Yes.
make it, well, in the interest of time, Bert, we only have 3 minutes left.
Oh,
So I think this is probably an issue that needs a little bit more discussion about the ins and outs of various approaches. So maybe we want to put that as a discussion item on GitHub so that people can actually think about it a little bit and express their opinion on how they would want to do it. And then we can see if the consensus develops from there.
Okay. Good. So there's two. I'll explain what it's the issue that I will put out of a voting kind. First, we will restrict ourselves to in series of members, series member of. That's the first one, and then the rest is optional use. Everything if it's not, we don't recommend, can be still optionally be used. And then we have to select a preferred direction. That's the second vote then. In series of
issues for that on
series members. And we will create a GitHub issue for that. Good.
So, and I think also number 9 in the next one.
That's what we put
don't
on
have time for that.
GitHub. It's already there,
Yeah.
but so okay, that's the thing. And so 9 was the membership of the in the catalog. So there's no specific property. There is already a GitHub issue around that, but a site connected to it. And the question is, how do we want to? Is there a need for it? And how do we want to indicate or count then all datasets in a catalog? How do we want to indicate the list of datasets that are not a dataset series? Do we find that this should be supported directly or not? So this is the question behind, do we want to have explicit support, or is it just through more complicated querying?
Okay, so I see one comment from Oystein with a question whether we conclude on accepting a dataset to be member of more than one dataset series. I think we already said yes, that's possible. But maybe that's also a GitHub issue. If we
I would propose that this is a GitHub issue too, because this has to do with how you see governance around it and how you deal with it, because it might be, even lead to challenging on the values that you have to set and so on.
And the other out of order question from Ludger, I also suggest Ludger put it in a GitHub issue there that people can actually discuss that. Can you do that? Okay, so it's 4 o'clock, so we're out of time. So we do the wrap up quickly.
Yeah, okay, good. So thank you for your feedback already. So what we will do on making the release is, of course, addressing the topics that were being addressed in past as bug fixes. If new ones come up, we'll try to address them too. We will as well address the issues that were resolved or had a resolution in the webinar of 2002, that we will address them and to make them into a proper specification that will be present as an HTML representation, so that the look and feel is addressed, so more penetrable for everyone. And of course, make a proposal towards the alignment that we have just discussed today. So this is the first step to it, to create DCAT dataset series as part of it, and the further other alignments topics that were into it. We only discussed about the dataset series, which was is the main challenging block, of course. There are some other alignments into it. In particular, have a look maybe to versioning if you agree with the resolutions over there. It's more a technical issue, I think, than a business discussion, but it would be good still to have a look at it. Of course, all feedback is welcome on GitHub, and to give you what is the time frame that we are looking at. So as I mentioned in the beginning, W3C is currently finishing the draft to become a candidate recommendation. There will be April ish on that comes out, and then at the end of May, June, somewhere, that will be the recommendation. In parallel, what we will do is do all this as was promised to make the new specification, and start publishing in March the drafts of it and so on. And we want to have a candidate new specification for public review for you in the middle of March. So we'll send an announcement around that, and then you will have the month of the remaining part of March plus April to review on it, to give us feedback on it, and then we start taking them into account, of even in parallel probably, but the goal is that we take then the month of May to finalize it, and then plan a release, and preferably, if it would be nice, then just right after the release of W3C, but it will be normally nicely in sync. That's the button pushing on that, and so I think want you still to invite on the webinars that are upcoming. On one hand, on the core vocabularies, on person, business, and so on, and the other ones on high-value data sets. That's where we discussed it already an announcement earlier on in the 24th of February. You will get an invite for that one as well. Pavlina, do you want to say something additionally?
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank you all for your feedback. As you may realize, and it is a very broad topic, and there are a lot of use cases that we haven't been able to think of. So we would highly appreciate for your feedback into GitHub space in order to come with a major review. It definitely a number of issues will be raised in the future, but it's important for us to have a very good idea, and in order to have to go towards this major release and an alignment with W3C DCAT 3, and to have a valid final review. So please put your comments, your use cases into GitHub issues, so that we take them under consideration, and perhaps we can have after the final release another webinars. More webinars need to take place, but not for now. We will consider them as in the future. So that is from my side.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And have a nice afternoon.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.